The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Brewster's Café, casting golden rectangles across the polished wooden floors. Sarah Chun adjusted her designer blazer and glanced at her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Saturday mornings were sacred, the only time in her demanding week as CEO of Technova Industries when she could focus entirely on her 80-year-old daughter Emma. Emma sat across from her at their usual corner table, small fingers wrapped around a warm mug of hot chocolate, her dark eyes fixed on the swirling marshmallows. She hadn't spoken a word in 18 months, not since the accident that had taken her father and left invisible scars that no amount of expensive therapy seemed to heal. Sarah watched her daughter's face for any flicker of expression, any sign that today might be different. The cafe bustled with weekend energy around them. Families laughed over pancakes, friends caught up over lattes, and the familiar sounds of grinding espresso beans and clinking dishes created a comforting symphony. Yet Emma remained in her own silent world, untouched by the warmth surrounding her. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've seen similar communication barriers in your community. Near the service counter, David Martinez pushed his maintenance cart quietly between tables, his weathered hands methodically wiping down surfaces that already gleamed. Most customers looked right through him, their conversations flowing around his presence as if he were invisible furniture. He wore the faded blue uniform of cafe maintenance staff, his graying hair neatly combed despite the early hour of his shift. David had been watching them for weeks now, this well-dressed woman and her silent daughter who occupied the corner table every Saturday morning. He recognized the particular kind of exhaustion that shadowed Sarah's eyes, the way her shoulders carried weight beyond the expensive fabric of her business attire. It was the look of a parent fighting battles others couldn't see. Sarah's phone buzzed insistently against the table. The screen displayed urgent messages from her executive team about Monday's board presentation, acquisition deals requiring her immediate attention, and investor calls that couldn't wait until business hours. She silenced the device with practiced efficiency, but Emma noticed everything. The little girl's eyes tracked each notification. Each moment her mother's attention drifted toward corporate responsibilities that seemed to eclipse their precious Saturday ritual. The irony wasn't lost on David as he carefully arranged clean mugs behind the counter. Sarah Chun commanded boardrooms filled with brilliant minds, negotiated million-dollar contracts with confidence, and led a company that developed cutting-edge communication technology. Yet here she sat, unable to reach her own daughter across 3 feet of cafe table. Emma pushed her hot chocolate away, untouched except for one small sip. She slipped from her chair and moved to the large window overlooking the busy street, pressing her small palm against the cool glass. Her breath fogged the surface as she traced invisible patterns with her finger, creating a private language that only she understood. David recognized the signs. In his previous life, before circumstances forced him into this humble work, he had spent countless hours with children exactly like Emma. Children whose voices had been stolen by trauma, whose silence spoke volumes to those who knew how to listen. The accident had happened on a Tuesday evening in spring. Sarah remembered every detail with crystalline clarity that haunted her quiet moments. Michael had been picking Emma up from dance class, their usual routine, while Sarah worked late preparing for the quarterly earnings call. The drunk driver ran the red light at 45 miles per hour, stealing a husband, a father, and Emma's voice in one devastating instant. Emma had survived physically unharmed, but something fundamental broke inside her that night. The chattering, giggling 80-year-old who once filled their house with stories and songs simply vanished. In her place sat this silent observer, processing the world through eyes that seemed far older than her years. Sarah blamed herself with a ferocity that surprised even her therapist. If she had left work earlier, if she had picked up Emma herself, if she had prioritized family over the endless demands of corporate leadership. The guilt carved deeper grooves into her heart with each passing day of Emma's silence. David understood loss in ways that defied easy explanation. His own wife Maria had died suddenly 3 years ago, leaving him to raise their daughter Sophia alone. The prestigious university position he had held, the research grants, the academic conferences, all became impossible to maintain while caring for a grieving 5-year-old. He had traded his corner office and tenure track for night shifts and weekend work that allowed him to be present for Sophia's needs. Yet he had never regretted the choice. Sophia was thriving now, a bright and confident 80-year-old who adapted to their simpler life with remarkable resilience. She attended the local public school, where David volunteered when his schedule allowed, helping other children navigate challenges that traditional education sometimes overlooked. Manager Trevor Walsh approached David with the particular stride of someone who enjoyed wielding small amounts of authority over others. His polo shirt stretched tight across his expanding middle, and his voice carried the sharp edge of perpetual dissatisfaction that seemed to define his interactions with the cafe staff. "Clean those tables faster, Martinez. We've got the Saturday lunch rush coming, and I don't need customers complaining about sticky surfaces." Trevor's words carried across the cafe with unnecessary volume, designed as much for public display as actual instruction. David nodded quietly and continued his methodical work, avoiding eye contact that might escalate Trevor's need for dominance. He had learned to navigate these moments with practiced invisibility, understanding that responding would only invite further humiliation. The other customers barely registered the exchange, their conversations flowing around the interaction as if witnessing a minor inconvenience rather than human dignity being stripped away. Sarah noticed the exchange from her corner table, feeling a familiar knot of frustration tighten in her stomach. In her corporate world, she commanded respect through competence and results. Here, watching this hardworking man being diminished by someone who clearly contributed far less value, she felt the sharp contrast between different kinds of power. Emma had returned to her seat, but pushed her pastry away untouched. The morning ritual that once brought her comfort now seemed to amplify her isolation. She watched other families with a longing that broke Sarah's heart, observing children who laughed and chattered with their parents while she remained locked in her silent world. David's hands never paused in their work, but his eyes tracked Emma's distress with the trained observation of someone who understood the subtle language of childhood trauma. The specialists had exhausted their recommendations. Dr. Peterson at Children's Hospital suggested intensive speech therapy 3 times weekly. Dr. Williams from the prestigious Developmental Center recommended a residential program in Switzerland that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Each expert delivered their assessment with clinical detachment that made Sarah feel like a failing executive whose project required increasingly desperate interventions. Emma's silence deepened with each passing week. At school, she completed her assignments with mechanical precision but never raised her hand, never participated in group discussions, never engaged with classmates during recess. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called Sarah twice this month, expressing concern about Emma's increasing withdrawal from social situations. The weight of corporate responsibility pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like a physical burden. The board meeting on Monday would determine the fate of their latest acquisition, a decision that would affect thousands of employees and millions in revenue. Her assistant had rescheduled the same investor call 4 times because Sarah kept prioritizing Emma's therapy appointments over critical business meetings. David finished cleaning the last table in his section and glanced toward Emma, who sat motionless beside the window. He had observed this pattern for weeks now, the way she positioned herself to watch the street while remaining disconnected from the cafe's warmth around her. Her body language spoke volumes to someone trained to read the subtle communications of children who had lost their voices. In his backpack, carefully protected in a worn leather portfolio, David kept research notes from his previous life. Academic papers about selective mutism, case studies of trauma-induced speech loss, and therapeutic approaches that went far beyond traditional methods. Knowledge that seemed worthless in his current circumstances, yet remained as sharp and relevant as ever. The Saturday lunch crowd surged into Brewster's Café, with typical weekend energy. Families with strollers navigated between tables, while teenagers clustered around laptops, and business people conducted informal meetings over sandwiches. The gentle morning atmosphere transformed into something overwhelming and chaotic. Emma's breathing quickened as voices rose around her. A toddler began crying 2 tables away while his parents struggled to calm him. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled with increased frequency as baristas rushed to fill orders. Someone dropped a ceramic mug near the counter, the sharp crash echoing through the crowded space like a gunshot. Sarah reached across the table, attempting to take Emma's hand, but her daughter pulled away and pressed herself against the window. The familiar signs of panic began to surface. Emma's small hands clenched into fists. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, seeking escape routes that didn't exist. "Mom, I can't breathe." Emma had whispered those words 18 months ago in the hospital after the accident. They were the last words she had spoken aloud. Now her lips moved silently, forming the same desperate plea while her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Other customers began to notice the disturbance. An elderly woman at the neighboring table leaned toward her husband and whispered something while staring directly at Emma. A businessman glanced up from his phone with obvious irritation as Emma's distress became more visible. Sarah felt the familiar helplessness wash over her like a tide. Every technique the therapist had taught her seemed inadequate against the raw terror consuming her daughter. She looked around desperately for help, for understanding, for anyone who might know how to reach a child drowning in her own silence. David made his decision in the space between heartbeats. Abandoning his maintenance cart beside the service counter, he approached Emma's table with quiet purpose. Trevor would undoubtedly reprimand him for leaving his assigned duties, but some things transcended workplace boundaries. He knelt beside Emma's chair, positioning himself at her eye level with the careful movements of someone who understood traumatized children. His weathered hands began to move in fluid, graceful patterns that transformed the air between them into something meaningful and beautiful. "Hello, Emma." His hands signed with gentle precision. "My name is David. I can see you're feeling scared right now. You're safe here." Emma's rapid breathing faltered as her eyes locked onto David's moving hands. The familiar language that lived in her memory but had been absent from her world for so long suddenly bloomed before her like a flower opening to sunlight. Her small hands trembled as she lifted them from her lap. "How do you know my name?" She signed back, her movements hesitant but correct. Sarah's coffee mug slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering against the table as lukewarm liquid spread across the wooden surface. She stared in shock as her daughter, who hadn't communicated meaningfully with anyone in 18 months, began an animated conversation using a language Sarah had never seen her use. "I've been watching you come here every Saturday," David signed in response. "I know you love hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and I know you feel sad sometimes. But I also know you're very brave and very smart." The cafe's noise seemed to fade into background whispers as other customers noticed the extraordinary interaction unfolding before them. Emma's panic attack dissolved like morning mist as she found herself finally, truly seen and understood by someone who spoke her hidden language. David's hands continued their eloquent conversation with Emma, each gesture revealing layers of expertise that seemed impossible given his humble circumstances. Sarah watched in amazement as her daughter's posture transformed from rigid terror to engaged curiosity. "I used to teach children like you," David signed to Emma. "Children who had big feelings that were hard to express with words. I worked at a university where I helped families learn new ways to communicate." Emma's eyes widened with wonder. "You were a teacher," she signed back, her movements becoming more confident with each exchange. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "How is this possible? You work here as maintenance staff." David turned toward Sarah, his expression carrying the weight of choices made from necessity rather than preference. "I was Dr. David Martinez, professor of deaf education at Northwestern University." I published research on selective mutism and trauma-induced communication disorders. But when my wife died, I needed work that allowed me to care for my daughter. Academic schedules don't accommodate single parenthood very well. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. This man, whom she had seen countless times cleaning tables and emptying trash bins, possessed exactly the expertise that teams of expensive specialists had failed to provide. The irony cut deep, highlighting her own assumptions about worth and capability based on circumstances rather than knowledge. Emma tugged at David's sleeve, drawing his attention back to her eager questions. "Can you teach my mom to talk with her hands too?" she signed. "I have so many things I want to tell her, but the words get stuck in my throat and won't come out." David smiled, the first genuine expression of joy Sarah had seen cross his face. "Of course I can teach her. Communication isn't just about speaking out loud." David's explanation unfolded with the precision of years spent researching and treating exactly Emma's condition. He described how selective mutism following trauma created specific neurological pathways that traditional speech therapy often failed to address. Emma's silence wasn't defiance or inability, but rather her mind's protective response to overwhelming emotional pain. "The specialists you've consulted focus on speech production," David explained to Sarah while simultaneously signing for Emma's benefit. "But Emma doesn't have a speech problem. She has a communication trauma that requires rebuilding trust in her own voice through alternative pathways first." Emma nodded vigorously, her hands moving in rapid excitement as she finally found someone who understood her internal experience. "It's like the words are trapped behind a big wall in my throat," she signed. "Every time I try to speak them out loud, the wall gets higher and stronger." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill as she watched her daughter express complex emotions with a clarity that had been absent for so long. The expensive therapy sessions, the clinical assessments, the pharmaceutical interventions, all had missed this fundamental understanding of Emma's specific needs. David continued explaining therapeutic approaches that honored Emma's trauma while gently encouraging communication through multiple modalities. Sign language could serve as a bridge back to spoken words, allowing her to rebuild confidence in expressing herself without the pressure of vocal production. "Your daughter is incredibly intelligent and emotionally aware," David told Sarah. "She simply needs communication tools that feel safe to her right now. Traditional approaches often push too hard, too fast, creating more resistance instead of healing." Emma reached across the table and took her mother's hand for the first time in months, her small fingers intertwining with Sarah's as if testing whether this new connection could be trusted. Margaret Brewster, the café's owner, arrived for her weekly inspection just as the extraordinary scene reached its peak. She had built this establishment over 20 years into a beloved community gathering place, and she prided herself on knowing every regular customer and employee. Yet she had never witnessed anything quite like this transformation unfolding at the corner table. The elderly woman stopped in her tracks, watching David communicate fluently with the silent child who had captured her heart over these past months. Margaret had often noticed Emma's withdrawn demeanor and felt concern for the well-dressed mother who seemed so helpless in reaching her daughter. Trevor rushed toward his boss, eager to deflect any criticism about David's abandoned maintenance duties. "Mrs. Brewster, I can explain." Martinez left his station without permission to bother customers. "I'll write him up immediately and get him back to work." Margaret raised her hand, silencing Trevor's anxious explanations. Her wise eyes took in the scene before her, the child's animated signing, the mother's tears of recognition, and David's gentle expertise guiding this remarkable breakthrough. Sarah pulled out her phone and quickly searched David Martinez, Northwestern University. The results filled her screen with academic papers, research citations, and faculty profiles that painted the picture of a distinguished career in deaf education and childhood trauma therapy. The man cleaning tables possessed credentials that surpassed any specialist she had consulted. "This is Dr. Martinez," Sarah said to Margaret, her voice filled with amazement. He was a professor at Northwestern University and he's just accomplished more in 10 minutes than 18 months of expensive therapy. Margaret's expression shifted from curiosity to profound respect as she observed David's continued interaction with Emma, recognizing true expertise when she witnessed it. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities as she watched David continue his patient interaction with Emma. Technova Industries had been struggling to develop meaningful accessibility initiatives despite her personal commitment to inclusive technology. The board constantly pressured her to demonstrate corporate social responsibility beyond mere profit margins. Dr. Martinez, Sarah said, her CEO instincts recognizing an opportunity that could transform both her company and her daughter's life. I'd like to offer you a position at Technova Industries. We need someone to lead our accessibility and inclusive communication division. David's hands paused mid-sentence in his conversation with Emma. He looked up at Sarah with surprise and something that might have been wariness. I appreciate the gesture, but I don't need charity because you feel grateful. This isn't charity, Sarah replied firmly. This is recognition of expertise that my company desperately needs. Your research background and practical experience with communication disorders could revolutionize how we approach assistive technology development. Emma tugged at David's sleeve, her small hands moving urgently. Please say yes, she signed. I want to keep learning from you, and maybe you can help other kids like me too. Margaret stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades reading people's character. Dr. Martinez, I've watched you work here for 2 years. You bring the same care and excellence to cleaning tables that you obviously brought to your academic career. This young lady is offering you a chance to use all your gifts again. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath as David considered the offer. Other customers had stopped their conversations to witness this moment of recognition, this correction of assumptions and prejudices that had kept extraordinary talent hidden in plain sight. David's decision would change everything for Emma, for Sarah, and for himself. 6 months later, the Technova Industries Accessibility Lab buzzed with innovative energy under David's leadership. His team had developed groundbreaking communication applications that served children with selective mutism, autism spectrum disorders, and various learning differences. The technology they created honored the principle that communication took many forms, all equally valid and valuable. Emma thrived in ways that surpassed Sarah's wildest hopes. She attended a specialized program that David had helped design, where sign language served as a bridge to gradually rebuilding her comfort with spoken words. Her confidence bloomed like a flower, finally receiving proper sunlight and care. Thank you, David, Emma whispered one Saturday morning at Brewster's Café, her first spoken words in nearly 2 years. The sound was soft but clear, filled with genuine gratitude and growing courage. Margaret had promoted David's daughter Sophia to Junior Café Ambassador, a position she created specifically to honor the family that had brought such transformation to her establishment. Trevor had been transferred to a different location after his attitude towards staff proved incompatible with Margaret's values. Sarah learned sign language with the dedication she once reserved for corporate acquisitions, discovering that communication with her daughter had depths she never imagined possible. Their Saturday morning ritual continued, but now filled with animated conversations in multiple languages of connection. David's research flourished once again, this time with practical applications that reached children worldwide through Technova's global platform. His academic papers began appearing in prestigious journals, bridging the gap between theoretical knowledge and real-world healing. If this story touched your heart, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment, or if you've witnessed someone's hidden talents being discovered in your own life.